Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the 2025 DNC chair election. Yes, that's correct. The Democratic Party is electing a new leader to lead them at the DNC based out of Washington, D.C., but the wing of the party responsible for funding state and local parties, getting involved and fielding candidates, and overall fundraising measures that lead to an eventual presidential candidate's mainstream of revenue, or not revenue, rather, that's not the right word for it, but fundraising for the general election. Now, the DNC has a unique position this time around where there are a variety of different candidates who have clearly come into this race with a number of different perspectives that need to be evaluated in the 2025 race. There are a lot more than normal, and looking back at races like 2017 and 2021, the races have ultimately come down to be far more competitive this time than in any other year prior. And that's because the Democratic Party is in dire need of a new leader, not necessarily someone on the presidential level, but rather a leader who can lead this party from 2025 to 2026 to 2027, and of course through the presidential election. Now, the outgoing chair and the incumbent chair right now is Jamie Harrison. You might remember him from my videos back in 2020 when he decided he was running for Senate against Lindsey Graham in the state of South Carolina. Polling put him within a very competitive edge where he was still losing to Lindsey Graham, but within that margin of error point, and Democrats raised over $100 million in that Senate race. Jamie Harrison went on to lose the Senate race to Lindsey Graham and then ran for DNC chair in 2021. Now, this race was uncontested. Jamie Harrison really didn't face any type of immense pushback for his chairman election, largely because many people expected everybody to fall in line behind Jamie Harrison in the 2021 race. People knew that Jamie Harrison was going to run, and all of a sudden here, we saw that this race, while might have been one of the more consequential ones, was one at this point in time that largely felt like it was inconsequential. Democrats had recently won control of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, as well as the White House, and so the 2021 elections were more so focused on who was this race going to go to. Jamie Harrison decided he wanted it, and thus it was given to him. But in the 2025 race, similar to that of 2017, the race is in fact contested. Now, in terms of declared candidates from 2017, although it did boil down to two candidates in particular, U.S. Representative Keith Ellison from Minnesota and Secretary of Labor Tom Perez from Maryland, that race here was pretty competitive, but it ultimately came down to the Clinton wing versus the Bernie wing of the party. A number of people withdrew before balloting, but by the time we had reached the final two contenders, it ultimately ended up with these two. Now, if you remember back then too, there was a lot of conversation about the future of the Democratic Party in a post-Donald Trump election era. But this time around, it feels far more important because Democrats are really going to be combating not only Donald Trump being elected, but a second Trump election, where in 2017, many Democrats saw that as a time where voters had largely abandoned Donald Trump. His approval rating was never in the positive after the first week of his presidency through the end of it. And pretty much we had seen the Democratic Party make substantive gains in special elections, in the midterm elections, in the off-year elections, and then eventually in the next presidential election. But it is this moment in time where Democrats are arguably at a weaker point. The Senate majority for the GOP is even higher, although the House majority is not. The Republican Party won by more electoral votes in the past election, 2024, than in any other election in the 21st century. And that means something to Democrats. The fact is, Donald Trump, despite 8 years of resistance and pushback against him as a candidate and him as a president, Republicans ended up doing even better on the Senate level and, of course, the presidential level. So, what's happening now? This weekend, the DNC election will conclude. February 1st, Saturday, we will know who the next DNC chair will be. And unlike 2021, it is a very, very contested race, with some very big moves coming in from Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi endorsing Ben Wickler for DNC chair. He's the current Wisconsin Democratic Party chair. But there are a number of candidates here who very well could be main contenders for that eventual spot. Now, of the declared here, the ones that I think have the highest chance, Ben Wickler, the Democratic Party chair of Wisconsin, Ken Martin, the Democratic Party chair of Minnesota, and Martin O'Malley, former governor of Maryland, my home state, and current, former Social Security Administration commissioner. Besides that, nobody else really has that much of a chance to win. We do see here, though, Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign manager is running. We have candidates from previous elections, but mainstream candidates here, the top three that we've been talking about pretty much, time and time again, Ben Wickler, Martin O'Malley, and Ken Martin. And so overall here, what this has been isn't necessarily a race for who can sway the American public or who can sway the Democratic base. The way the DNC chairs are elected is that it is voting members of the Democratic Party, and so very often can mean different things. But voting members, 448 DNC voting members, 225 are needed to win. And so since Jamie Harrison is not running for re-election because this race is open, endorsements are going left, right, and center. You can see here that a number of forums have been held, a number of debates have been held. People have been watching, these debates, engaging with them, trying to see, what's happening here, who's the best person to lead this party. And it looks like, in a very similar way, the endorsements are coming down in different ways. Ken Martin receiving endorsements from a lot of members of his side of the Midwest. Also surprisingly, or I guess unsurprisingly though, Tim Walz has decided to endorse Ken Martin to be the next DNC chair. I get it. They're both from Minnesota. We're also seeing here Keith Ellison, who was that runner-up in 2017, a lot of name recognition amongst the voting members for this time around. So Ken Martin is pulling in some of those endorsements. Martin O'Malley pulling in some from Maryland. Angela Alsobrooks endorsed him. Senator from Maryland, Ben Cardin, former senator there. Chris Van Hollen, incumbent senator. Tim Kaine, who's from the DMV. Virginia, former vice presidential candidate. So again, some endorsements there. But the really big ones, I would even argue, are coming primarily from Ben Wickler, who's receiving endorsements from governors all across the country, from Kansas, from Maine, from Michigan, from Kentucky, and even lesser known but more relevant actors in the Democratic Party. Jocelyn Benson, a candidate for governor in Michigan, but also Secretary of State, someone who has won a statewide elected position, right? People like Kathy Hochul and Maura Healey picking candidates there. Like I said, too, major representatives, Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, that's a huge one. Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, we know him, that's a huge one, right? Tammy Baldwin, huge one. All these different candidates here or notable politicians endorsing him, that's a big one. A lot of individuals, too. Very well-known people within the Democratic establishment. Again, who are they trying to reach here? Why would it matter that a co-host of Pod Save America is endorsing him? Well, that might matter to the, avid listeners amongst the DNC base, amongst those who are voting DNC members. Those things can make a difference. So far, 151 DNC members are backing Wickler. You can see here that according to Martin O'Malley, 137 DNC members, and then Ken Martin, 200 DNC members. However, 225 are needed to win. So this is going to be a very contested race. It's going to be interesting to watch, who's endorsing who. Anderson Clayton, chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, is endorsing Wickler, right? Nikema Williams, chair of the Georgia Democratic Party, is endorsing Martin. It is really all left, right, and center as to who is endorsing who. Now, of those who are declining to endorse, originally it was Tim Walz, ended up endorsing Martin. Jamie Harrison is not going to endorse, and then, of course, different associations that are involved with the Democratic organizing at large. So, what do we know so far about these three contenders? Well, I will say this. Martin O'Malley is probably the last person who's going to come in here to win this race. He's probably going to come up short and end up being eliminated to a point where it's going to end up with the top two, Ben Wickler and Ken Martin. That's largely because he hasn't announced more endorsements than Ben Wickler. On top of that, too, a lot of this is coming from mainstream Democratic establishment, but he hasn't been recently elected to anything. He was governor of Maryland, left that office in 2015, and since then has been a Biden appointee, ran for president in 2016, but beyond that, not much else to his name. And so that's a problem, because when that happens, and Martin O'Malley decides, I'm in this position where I'm running. Sure, you have some establishment members endorsing you, but 137 members is not enough to get you across that finish line. So chances are he's going to be on his way out. So let's really narrow in on Ken Martin and Ben Wickler, who more likely than not, one of those two will be the next DNC party chair. Well, the pitches are quite simple from both of them. They both come from states that were able to withstand the Republican trend that we saw nationally. Pretty much, a 6-point shift on the national popular vote across swing states, 6-7 point shifts from the last election, but unique to Wisconsin and Minnesota, both of these where Wickler is in Wisconsin, Martin is in Minnesota. Minnesota only shifted by 2.9%, again, compared to 6 points across the country. Wisconsin, just 1.5% compared to 6 points across the country. Another thing the Democrats are pointing to, Wickler and others pointing to, Minnesota, we saw Amy Klobuchar win by 16 points. He largely takes credit for that. Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin held on, a Democrat, when Donald Trump won the state, when Democrats were not holding on in states like Pennsylvania, losing, a decades-long incumbent in the state of Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, losing to Dave McCormick here. Again, Pennsylvania going to Republicans on the Senate level, Wisconsin did not. And so for a variety of different reasons, what we're seeing here is similar messaging, when it comes down to how we approach state parties. A lot of them have said we need to invest in college students, we need to invest in youth chapters, we need to invest in local parties, we need a 50-state strategy. They largely are saying the same thing. But the fundamental question is here, Ken Martin is largely seen as the slightly more progressive one by some, Ben Wickler is seen as the more practicable one by others. And that's really the dynamic that's at play here. And it reminds me a little bit of 2017 that Tom Perez represented the, Clinton wing that made the electability argument. Keith Ellison was, making the argument from the other perspective that it was, to come from a different, viewpoint from progressive politics to more focus on, a new wave for the Democratic Party. So Keith Ellison received endorsements from Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, a lot of these people, a number of U.S. representatives got involved in this race, a number of people from California and Maryland did the same thing. I mean, this endorsement list was quite extensive. Tom Perez, however, received the backing of Barack Obama and Joe Biden and other candidates, people like or other major Democrats, such as Steny Hoyer, who at the time was the minority leader for the Democrats, a number of governors, including governors from Pennsylvania and Virginia, and then, Democratic and Republican states. We were seeing here that, Tom Perez got that institutional backing. Keith Ellison was trying to move the party in a different direction. While I don't necessarily think the same thing is happening with Ken Martin and Ben Wickler, I think both of them have received, a lot of support, though Wickler definitely has a bit more of that establishment edge. I don't think we're in the situation where it's, Clinton or Bernie or Biden or Bernie, like it was arguably, not really because it was uncontested, but maybe hypothetically in 2021. This one seems more about who has the track record, who has the organizational experiences, and largely this has been, a very clean race. There hasn't been as much mudslinging that you traditionally expect in politics, but it is a competitive race. And so we will see on Saturday who's elected chair. It will make a difference as to how the party operations are run. I really am interested, though, exactly what both of these candidates really are going to do once elected. It's a lot of talk. You can promise the world when you're running for party chair, but when you actually are moving to Washington, D.C., and taking what you learned either in Wisconsin or Minnesota and applying it to a national stage, what exactly do you implement right away? Are you changing the way the communications team operates? Are you changing the way the Democrats engage with local chapters? Are you changing the way the Democrats field and vet their candidates, giving a number of, party flips we've been seeing over the past 4 years from Democrat, to Trump Republican? These are questions that are going to be answered through the forums, through the voting, and questions that will be answered in the coming weeks as this DNC chair sets into his position. Because unlike 2021, which had a very clear party leader, that being President Biden and Vice President Harris and Nancy Pelosi and other major Democrats and Chuck Schumer, as Democrats came into a trifecta, this will matter a lot. Because Democrats not only do not have the trifecta, but Republicans do. Democrats don't have a single chamber of Congress or the White House to call their own. And so that matters for Democrats. What happens in this race will determine a lot about messaging, a lot about high-level maneuvering between now and the next presidential and the midterms and the off years and the specials. A lot can be impacted by this DNC chair race. And so far, it looks like it's a tied race between Ken Martin, Ben Wickler. It'll be an interesting one to watch, but we will know in less than 72 hours who the next DNC chair will be. And it looks like it's a toss-up for now, but a lot to be decided because of it and a lot to be impacted depending on who wins. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my post-2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.